I can't believe that you're in love with me. You're telling everyone you know that I'm on your mind each place you go. They can't believe that you're in love with me. I have always...
From the classic femme fatale presence in the 1940s and 1950s to the now modernistic and unique portrayal of the femme fatale in the 21st century, environmental factors including political and social events throughout the years can attribute to the diverse evolution of the femme fatale archetype. The femme fatale in classic American film noir consists of the female being the root of the male's downfall through her evil and seductive ways. The woman desires the man for his use as a tool for her to get what she wants. This representation of the femme fatale in early Hollywood cinema during the 1940s stems from the result of the tragic Second World War, where traditional views of gender norms were rapidly changing. As their husbands fought overseas, women were forced into the workplace for their first time ever. In post-war times, men believed their entrance back into the workforce would be immediate and without question. However, the women that made a living through their jobs and have become financially independent felt threatened by this attitude. The norms of society were changing. This was no temporary adjustment for the war. This theme of social norm changes is apparent throughout the evolution of film noirs. Throughout the analysis of these films throughout the years, we can see that all the films reflect the time periods they were set and released in. Women being forced into the workplace during the Second World War, the feminist movement of the 90s, and the fight for LGBTQ rights in the early 2000s are all sources of inspiration for the films discussed here. 1945's Detour, 1992's Basic Instinct, and 2004's La Mala Educación. Detour ends with the death of the femme fatale by the male protagonist, Basic Instinct with no deaths, and La Mala Educación with the death of both. We will explore these three films as we analyze the evolution of femme fatales over the years of US and Spanish film. Going back in time, 1945's Detour is a crime film noir that follows Al Roberts, a piano player hoping to find his way back to his girlfriend Sue, who had moved to Hollywood in order to pursue her singing career. Traveling from New York on limited funds, Al hitchhikes and walks his way across the country. In this journey, he comes across Charles Haskell, a man kind enough to give him a ride. Through the ride, Haskell falls into an unexpected death, leaving Al worried on how the death may be pinned on him and be held responsible. In an attempt to avoid the situation, he figures it would be wise not only to steal Haskell's car and leave the body to the side, but to strip Haskell's identity and take it for his own as he makes his way to Hollywood. On his way, Al picks up a stray hitchhiker, Vera, who he quickly identifies Al as a fraud.
You're not fooling anyone. This buggy belongs to a guy named Haskell. That's not you, mister.
Taking advantage of this knowledge, she convinces Al to sell the car in order to make some quick money in exchange for secrecy. This blackmailing does not end here, as Vera reads in the newspaper Charles Haskell is due for a possible inheritance and she wants to use Al as an in on that cash. Al, skeptical, refuses to give into this plan as his chances of being caught were high due to the many holes in their plan and story, risking their freedom. Through back and forth, Vera threatens to call the police, leaving Al to accidentally kill Vera by strangling her with the telephone wire. Depressed of the series of events that have occurred, we see Al walking the road to then be arrested by the police. Films like Detour gave way to the femme fatale archetype we recognize today. You have a woman, Vera in this case, who is quickly seen as beautiful.
Or the beauty you dream about when you're with your wife, but a natural beauty.
But that is exactly what caught Al's eyes in the first place. Without a doubt, she has her own ambitions in mind to get what she wants and would do as much as blackmailing Al to get it.
But just remember who's boss around here. If you shut up and don't give me any arguments, you'll have nothing to worry about.
But the film almost makes you forget who the real criminal here is. Al, complicit to the unreported death of Charles Haskell and stealing his car and identity in order to get to his girlfriend Sue in Hollywood. It is during these times around the 40s and 50s, around World War II, where film noirs like Detour reflect male anxieties because women began to grow much more independent as individuals.
If this were fiction, I would fall in love with Vera, marry her, and make a respectable woman of her. or else she'd make some supreme Class A sacrifice for me and die.
This gave way to develop this beautiful, seductive, yet ruthless kind of woman we know and frankly fall for as well. But this independence was seen as a threat to the gender norms men had expected women to conform to. So of course, Vera dies, or it would be recognized as part of the archetype that the femme fatale dies. But if we were to jump almost 50 years from Detour's release, how has this portrayal of the femme fatale changed in 1992's Basic Instinct? For a brief summary, Basic Instinct is a thriller mystery film noir that follows a detective, Nick Curran, in an investigation to solve an ice pick murder. Catherine Trammell, an author and educated in psychology, has become the prime suspect of the case despite there being a lack of evidence to prove her involvement. In a game of cat and mouse, Catherine continues to lead the detective on to complete a book she is writing.
What's your new book about?
A detective. He falls for the wrong woman.
What happens?
She kills him.
Giving him just enough reason to believe she was guilty to drive him crazy. Crazy for her, and crazy to solve the case.
And I'll nail you.
Nah, you'll just fall in love with me.
I'm in love with you already. But I'll nail you anyway.
After a series of death, deception, and manipulation, Catherine's book is almost finished. When Detective Nick's partner is predictably murdered, Nick ends up killing his former love interest and police psychologist, Dr. Beth Garner, thinking that she was behind the series of murders. Although evidence in her home proved her to be the perpetrator, the end scene of the film leaves the audience thinking otherwise, that Catherine was the killer the whole time. In this film, Catherine Trammell becomes an iconic femme fatale. She epitomized what it meant to be beautiful, seductive, and ruthless, the femme fatale we know since the start of film noirs. What makes Trammell so different from the past femme fatales is that from the very beginning of her introduction, she has had control of the narrative from start to finish. Double major, magna cum laude in literature and psychology, it can be assumed that yes, Catherine is in the literal works of writing her new book with Detective Nick as the main character, and she has written herself as her own femme fatale of this narrative.
You're gonna make a terrific character, Nick.
She showed how easily men give up their control using her intelligence, sexuality, and ruthlessness to achieve what she wants. Using her sexuality, she has had every man and woman on a leash. She basically objectifies herself, knowing it will work in order to unfold the intended story for her book.
Have you ever fucked on cocaine, Nick? It's nice.
In this case, because she has such control over what unravels, the film noir doesn't end in her demise, nor does it end horribly for Nick despite his series of downfalls throughout his life. You see, Catherine has been keeping an eye on Nick prior to their official introduction, and so she knew that Nick was vulnerable due to his past addictions and history. Therefore, Catherine had chosen the perfect character for her story to manipulate, even if it led to his death. But what really signified her power and control of the narrative in this film is when the final scene shows that she restrains herself from making Nick her next victim, despite her initial intentions to kill him.
They fuck like minks raise rugrats and live happily ever after.
It won't sell.
Why not?
Somebody has to die.
This film reflected how the femme fatale of this time period is a liberated woman, She no longer needs to die at the expense of a man, and she is able to have greater control over her life outcomes. With the third wave of feminism happening around this time, fighting for women's reproductive rights and record number of women in office, Trammell represented a woman free to make her own choices, even if it meant criminally. Now, if we were to take a smaller jump into the future, 12 years later, where does the femme fatale archetype evolve with 2004's La Mala Educación? La Mala Educación is a drama romance film noir that introduces Ignacio, a young boy who had fallen for his childhood lover, Enrique, in their Catholic boarding school. Being caught together in after hours, Father Manolo, also known as Manuel Berenguer, is a teacher who had built a predatory attraction to Ignacio, and he molests him in exchange for not punishing Enrique. But still, Enrique is expelled. We see that when Ignacio has grown up, they no longer identify as Ignacio, but as Zahara, a transgender woman. She is caught struggling with a drug addiction and is living with her younger brother, Juan. When Zahara develops a story called The Visit based on her child molestation, she uses it to try and blackmail Father Manolo into giving her 1 million pesetas. When Berenguer and Zahara's brother, Juan, develop a romantic relationship, they decide together they would be better off if Zahara was dead. And so, taking advantage of Zahara's addiction, they give her a strong heroin that leads to her death. To lessen any suspicion of their contribution to her death, Berenguer and Juan decide to cut ties for the time being. 4 years later, Juan visits Zahara's childhood lover Enrique under a fake identity, his brother Ignacio. Knowing Enrique is a film director, Juan has brought forth Zahara's written piece, The Visit, hoping to get it produced into a film on the condition that Juan plays the role of Zahara. Enrique, skeptical of Ignacio, also known as Juan's true identity, soon discovers that the Ignacio he knew has been dead for years. Hesitant, and with peak curiosity of Juan's determination to play this role of Zahara, Enrique produces the film with Juan casted as his sibling, Zahara. At the end of the Visit's production, Berenguer pays Enrique a visit and reveals the truth of Zahara's true death, unlike the death depicted in the film. Juan's true colors are revealed to Enrique, leaving Enrique with a bad taste about the whole situation, of course. The film ends by revealing Juan and Enrique received commercial success with The Visit. Berenguer meets death after Juan runs him over for no longer wanting to be romantically involved with him and continuously getting blackmailed about his contribution to Zahara's death. In this film, Pedro Almodóvar, director of La Mala Educación, does a great job of developing this modern take of a film noir, but does even a better job at redefining what it means to be a femme fatale. As we looked in the past, early film noirs like 1945's Detour, the femme fatale was a beautiful and seductive woman destined for death, or downfall like her male counterpart. 1992's Basic Instinct gave power to the femme fatale, letting her decide fate without having to die at the expense of a man. In 2004's La Mala Educación, we have our first seen transgender femme fatale who dies but lives on through her brother Juan. You see, as complex as it sounds, we basically have two femme fatales in this film, Zahara and Juan. The moment Zahara decided to blackmail Father Manolo, or Berenguer, is when she became the femme fatale of the film. So how does Juan fit into this? Well, prior to Zahara's death, we see that Juan has difficulty dealing with Zahara's drug addiction, as it has caused many financial problems for their family. But we also see that Juan is only able to accept Zahara's transgender identity as an additional burden in his life. It isn't until after Zahara's death where he grows a need to understand who Zahara was by wanting to play the role of her in the film and taking on the identity of Ignacio.
Estoy trabajando con la mejor imitadora de Sara Montiel. Actúo en el Bamboleo, un club de ambiente. También trabajo allí de camarero. Así puedo estudiar de cerca las locas.
This facade almost merges them into one through Juan's strong fixation to be and understand Zahara, which is how he is able to carry on the torch as the femme fatale. A turning point for Juan is at the end of the production of the film The Visit. At the final scene, Juan randomly bursts into tears. This is pivotal as it can be seen as Juan feeling either guilty for what he has done to Zahara or a moment of realization where he truly sympathized with Zahara and her story. By this point, Juan is no longer interested in Berenguer and fulfills the femme fatale's roles years later by running him over to his death. But why does Juan also get the label of a femme fatale despite identifying as a cis man unlike Zahara, a transgender woman? Well, as Brigida M. Pastor explains in their article, Queering Gender, the new femme fatale in Almodóvar's La Mala Educación, Juan is able to live as the femme fatale because he is queer and can have access to the feminine world. And as I quote, "The modern femme fatale, which is created in the image of the classic figure, can only exist if he is part of the gay, lesbian, bi, trans, or intersexed community. Therefore, Juan's character must be queer in order to fulfill his role in the new filmic context." End quote. But I would go on to say that it is not because he is queer, but more specifically because he takes on the identity of a transgender woman. Juan goes on to further this distinction of what it means to be queer when he separates himself from Zahara.
Tú no sabes lo que es tener un hermano como Ignacio y vivir en un pueblo. No te lo puedes ni imaginar.
This essentially others Zahara and gives additional evidence to how being a gay man is an entirely different experience than being a trans woman in the world. You see, the idea of being a femme fatale has been reflective of social issues of women for the time periods these films were set or released in throughout history. We see this expressed in Detour and Basic Instinct, and it is no different in La Mala Educación, where LGBT plus Q rights were on social spotlights in the 70s and 80s and rising in more ascendance in the 21st century. Director Pedro Almodóvar has essentially made the femme fatale inclusive of non-cisgendered women. Had Juan not taken the identity of Ignacio, seduced Enrique, and fixated over the role of Zahara to understand her, we would be looking at an homme fatale, which strips the significance of a femme fatale and a woman's relationship to their male counterpart in society.